Senator Ludlam.
Thanks, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise this afternoon to just put some brief thoughts on the record on the upcoming by-election in Canning, in my home state of Western Australia, and my thoughts with everyone from the Australian Greens, our volunteer team, and everybody who's putting in the effort, but also those from other parties, a reasonably large field of independents, and those who are showing that, at least at that grassroots level, our democracy's still got a bit of life in it yet. To Dr Vanessa Rowland in particular, my friend and occasional colleague. I've worked on a lot of the issues, and I've learned a great deal from her over time, and her passion for low-carbon cities, low-carbon urban development, not as a kind of hair shirt that we have to collectively wear, but as a way of making our cities and towns more vibrant, more economically productive, safer, cleaner, lower pollution environments and better places to live, is genuinely inspiring. And it's been wonderful to see Dr Rowland move out of the small business role just briefly and onto the political stage to be able to throw those ideas into the field. So our thoughts are with you at this time, and noting, I guess, that everybody engaged in the by-election campaign in Canning, which for those from further afield who aren't familiar with that part of town, it's a very large outer metro electorate to the south and eastern part of the city of Perth, the Perth metropolitan area, that sort of stretches from two, in a way, quite different constituencies between the hub around Armidale and the hills, up the Darling Escarpment, and all the way around to the southern part of Mandurah down on the coast, and the sort of peri-urban hinterland in between. Is that it's an area that has been quite substantially left out of the national debate, and as we found in the by-election last year, it's a really valuable way of putting local issues into the national context. One of the national contexts, I guess, being that the country has a different Prime Minister today than the one that it had when the by-election was called only a couple of weeks ago. And I think, you know, snap polling notwithstanding, it's likely that the government, under the new leadership of Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, is likely to get a bit of a sugar hit and is likely to get a bit of a bump in the polls, which I think is inevitable and happens reasonably reliably after these sorts of changeovers has happened. What I guess I would be asking people doing as you're considering your vote, and the large number of people who are undecided, or at least were the last time the pollsters took a look around, is not just the style, not just whether there's a nicer smile or a better salesman, but what it is that's being sold. Because one of the things that we discovered on the way in, and also want to acknowledge the work of the Australian Solar Council in sticking up for their members, principally the small businesses around the country who are trying to get the solar sector on its feet, but also all of those who use their products, who are in effect home power stations. That 23% of undecided voters stated renewables were their #1 issue of importance. Now, that's really unusual to find the issue hitting such prominence, and I think it was in part provoked by the fact that we, until very recently, had a climate change denying Prime Minister in office, and kind of led that culture from the top. Not quite brave enough to announce it and call it out as crap, as he once used to do. Sort of pretend and proceed with a fig leaf, but effectively that was what permeated the culture, and more importantly, the legislative agenda of the government was to effectively, as rapidly as possible, try and kill the clean tech sector off, whether that be large-scale solar, wind energy developers in our regional hinterlands, or the kind of people that the Australian Solar Council are speaking to in places like Canning. So that's a quarter of undecided voters putting renewable energy as their #1 priority. And what we hear from Mr Turnbull is that the policy settings aren't going to change. They'll attempt to do a better sales job, but the policies themselves aren't going to change. And anybody who finds that mystifying, I would just invite to listen to the contribution that was given by Senator McDonald not 15 or 20 minutes ago, where he laid out in actually quite graphic detail exactly what the problem is and why it's unlikely that anything will change, no matter who is the front man and who is providing the sales job. The Barnett government isn't much better. My colleague Robin Chappell MLC discovered in the fine print of their contract a week or two ago that anyone who wants to install photovoltaics is signing a synergy contract that says they won't install battery storage or an electric vehicle. Unbelievable that that's what they're forced to sign up to if they're putting PV on their roof. So these are the issues that are in play, among many others, in the Canning by-election. And what we would ask would be, for people who are still considering where to park their vote, is whether you think climate change is a slow-motion disaster that is sort of something that we're leaving for our kids or our grandkids, or whether you think it's right upon us today as an urgent imperative that we need to deal with, or whether you are grabbing it as an extraordinary opportunity to reshape our communities and improve the quality of life for people who are living particularly in outer metropolitan areas. And this is why I think it's interesting to be hearing voices from places like Armidale, Mandurah, Boddington, and some of the smaller settlements on the edge of the Perth metropolitan area. And we look to advice of groups like the National Growth Areas Alliance, who is an alliance of local governments that effectively take in the growth areas on the edges of all Australia's great capital cities. 83% of Perth's employment is in the suburbs. So more than 4 out of 5 jobs aren't in the central business district of Perth, and I presume it's reasonably similar for other Australian capitals. And yet our public transport system and our infrastructure is all tremendously CBD-centric, and it's the outer metropolitan areas, even though are growing very, very rapidly, that have missed out on the services and on the infrastructure that I think can be a real focus in a by-election like that that's occurring in Canning at the moment. There's overwhelming evidence that residents in the fast-growing outer suburbs lack access to those jobs and to services as those in the inner suburbs. And that really is a question of opportunity, and it's something that we can do quite a bit about. Congested and insufficient road networks, a total lack of public transport. There's good rail service into Armidale and Mandurah, obviously, but most people do not live within an easy walk or a bike ride of those railway stations. And so we've seen, and this is not to cast particular political rocks, because there were some attempts under the last government to deal with this issue in a pilot sort of a way, is providing those jobs and bringing those jobs and services to outer metropolitan areas isn't something that should simply be left up to the market or wait till people have moved into so-called affordable houses on the far fringes of our metropolitan areas and then wait 20 years for the jobs to show up or for the public transport to show up. The National Growth Areas Alliance, Bringing the Basics Within Reach report, which was released reasonably recently, told stories of outer suburban residents through the Voices of Our Suburbs project. And these are voices that are often left out of political debates, but the by-election that's occurring in Canning at the moment is a wonderful opportunity to actually highlight and listen to those people. The amount of time that it takes to commute, to work, getting the kids to school, if public transport infrastructure hasn't been provisioned, waiting for these suburbs to be developed, waiting for 20 years before basic services are provisioned. Better access to jobs, health services, local schools, better public transport, more leisure opportunities. These things should not be the province of the inner cities alone. One of the projects to get to what this would actually look like in practice that I've most enjoyed working on with AUDRAC and the Property Council over the last couple of years was a project called Transforming Perth, which is about doing infill well. Doing public transport-centred urban development where the growth, rather than simply spilling out over the periphery of our great cities, in Perth at least, the modelling that we've done had shown that just by developing infill, not high-rise, 2 or 3 stories along public transport corridors, you could infill 250,000 diverse and affordable dwellings within the existing urban fabric of Perth. That is very consistent with what residents ask for and what advocacy groups like the National Growth Areas Alliance are asking for as well. A way of channeling urban growth, but also a way of threading services, the childcare centres, the places of employment, the civic spaces, places for people to congregate, which have tended to be more in the inner city areas, the more established areas. There are no reasons at all why we can't breathe life back into some of the suburban areas that are so desperate for the services, the infrastructure and the employment hubs that others in the inner cities enjoy. So I'm looking forward to getting back to Western Australia. It's about this time in the cycle where I start to miss the West very much, and look forward to meeting up with the election campaign team and Dr Rowland on Saturday and see what we can make of the by-election, see how this most recent, somewhat seismic perhaps, I guess that's yet to be seen, political change that's happening here in Canberra actually affects people's views and people's lives on the ground.